Hello, my name is Darrell Robert Schoon, and today I'm going to talk about the differences and similarities to what is happening now compared to what happened in the 1930s. And they're not the same thing, but they do share certain attributes. I forgot who said it, but this person said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think by describing what happened in the 1930s and juxtaposing it against what's happening today, you'll see the similarities. Now, what our times and the 1930s have in common is what happened in the decade before. What happened before the 1930s was the Roaring Twenties. All right? The Roaring Twenties was a period of expansion in the United States. Credit was loose, things were growing. They had a great radio transmission. RCA was just exploding. All right. Now, what happened in the United States in the 1990s? You had another boom, like the Roaring Twenties. They didn't call it the Roaring Twenties. It wasn't. It was the 90s. But in the latter part of the 90s, we had a runaway stock market, just like you had a runaway stock market in the 1920s. They were both caused by excessive credit chasing a finite amount of goods. The more credit out there, chasing the same amount of goods makes those goods go up, whether or not they're houses, stocks, or artifacts, art. If you double the amount of money, you're going to get a price increase of 100%. That's just how it works. Now, it happened in the 1920s when you had the Roaring Twenties. Life was good. Everybody was celebrating. Everybody had a stock tip. It looked like there was no tomorrow. And what they did in the 1920s was and this is what everybody does. In times of expansion, you want to take advantage of it. It's human nature. Leverage the good times, because the good times may not last. In fact, the good times will not last. So what you want to do is you want to leverage the good times. Now, how do you leverage it? Well, if stocks are going up, you want to buy more stocks than the money you have. So you buy in margin. All right? Let's say you go down to Dean Witter or Merrill Lynch or your stockbroker and you say, I want to buy some stocks. And he says, well, how much money do you have? And you go, 50 grand. Well, you can buy $50,000 worth of stocks right there. All right? But let's say Dean Witter says, oh, you know what? You can leverage this. I can give you, if you give me $50,000 credit, cash, we can leverage this and you could buy $100,000 worth of stocks against the $50,000 cash that you have. Now, what that means is, with your $50,000, you can buy twice as many stocks. And if the stocks go up 20%, you're going to make 20% on your stocks, but since you only have 50% down, you're going to make 40% on your stocks. You're going to double what you have. So what you want to do in good times is you want to leverage the amount of money you have at risk, hoping it's going to pay off in a likewise greater amount of profit. That's what leverage is. All right, now, what's the downside of leverage? The downside of leverage is you go in there, you put $50,000 down, you buy $100,000 worth of stocks, and the stocks drop by 20%. Well, what happens is you have twice the amount of stocks that you really would have had normally. And so instead of taking a 20% loss, you're taking a 40% loss because you have you own twice as many stocks as you would have had otherwise. This is the downside of leverage. Now, I want to use an example that a lot of you are very familiar with now. We're not going to go to the stock market. We're going to go to real estate. All right? Now, let's say you bought a house in 2003. All right? You put 10% down. Okay? The house cost you $200,000. All right? You put $20,000 down on a $200,000 house. All right? Already what you've got is a leverage of 10 to 1. You put $20,000 cash down, 10% down on a $200,000 house. This is normal. It doesn't look like there's leverage, but there is. Because, for example, if that house rose in value to $400,000 by 2005, You made $200,000 if you sold it in 2005. You put $20,000 down. The house increased in value. It doubled from $200,000 to $400,000. You sell the house in 2005. You get a check for $400,000. You only put $20,000 cash in. That's a huge gain. Now, but the truth of the matter is this. If you take your chips off the table and cash them, you're going to get hit with a large capital gains tax. Why? I mean, didn't you put 20 grand down? Yes. All right. And the downside of it was if the house lost value, because what you're on the hook for is $180,000. All right. Now, you're just a homeowner. You're not thinking, oh, I'm on the hook for 180. You're thinking, wow, I just bought a $200,000 house for 20 grand. That's pretty good for an average Joe. You don't think, man, I'm on the hook for 180 grand. I just gave the bank 20 grand and I'm on the hook for 180 grand. Well, you are on the hook for 180 grand. But what happened is because you bought at the beginning of a boom, your house went up to 200,000, gain doubled, went up to $400,000, and you got a tremendous return on your investment if you're able to take it off the table. But you can't, because not in whole, because if you take that money and don't buy another house within a few months, you're going to pay a whopping capital gains tax. Now, why is there a whopping capital gains tax? I mean, you made it fair and square. You put $20,000 down, your house doubled in value, you now sold it for $400,000, you should be able to take it off the table. No. The truth of the matter is why there's capital gains tax is they want to keep you in the game. They never want you to take your winnings off the table. They never want you to walk away from the table with your pocket stuffed with cash that you want at the table. And the truth of the matter is the psychology of making huge gains like that is going to keep you in the game. I mean, if you made that amount of money in 2005, the chances are you weren't going to take that cash, stuff it in your pockets, and give it to your kids and retire and go, my God, was I lucky at the wheel of fortune. No, you're going to go, my God, I put $20,000 down and bought a house for $200,000. The house doubled in the next 2 years. I sold it for $400,000, and I now have a check for $400,000. Then you got to pay off your loan, which was $200,000. So now you're ahead $200,000. You put 20 grand on the table. You have your net is now $200,000. You made 10 times. You didn't double. You made 1,000% profit in 2 years. And you probably didn't fix the roof if you were lucky. You didn't put a new counter in, all right? You mowed the lawn. You made sure the plants didn't die. And my God, that house that cost $200,000 to you in 2000, in 2002, 2003, you now sold for $2,000 in 2005. You now sold for double the amount of money, and you made 10 times the amount of money that you put in. If that happened to you, the chances are greater than 10 to 1 that you went and took that money and slammed it down on another house. Wow! You never made such easy money in your life before. So what you did, let's say you took the $200,000 in 2005, shopped around, of course, all right, and you bought yourself a $2 million house in 2006. I mean, this house, you thought the house that you bought in 2003 was a house of your dreams. And it was at the time, because your dreams weren't that big. But you put 200 grand in your pocket, all of a sudden your dreams got a lot bigger. All of a sudden your dreams were, oh, that nicer section of town. All right? Maybe that place by the beach. Maybe this. Maybe 5 bedrooms instead of 3. Okay? 3 garages instead of 2. All right? I mean, your dreams expanded to the amount of credit available. So you took that 200 grand, which is now worthy of a 10% down payment on a $2 million house. And boy, are you rolling. Now what happened was that you walked into a bank in 2005 with 200 grand in your pocket. The guy looked at you and he didn't care that you were still a school teacher. He didn't care that you were making $42,000 as a 7th grade teacher at the local junior high school. He knew that you had 200 grand cash, and he knew that if he submitted your loan application to the mortgage companies, they would write a check. They would give him. They would say, it's okay, loan this guy $1.8 million. All right? I mean, you're still making $42,000 a year, and it is true. The next year you were going to get a 3.5% raise, all right? But he gave you a loan for, what is it? A $1.8 million. Now, you do have a bit of brains, all right? The loan payments on $1.8 million is far above your income, all right, as a school teacher in the 7th grade. You know that. But you also just won at the Wheel of Fortune, all right? And so the banker goes, listen, he's got your monthly bills. He knows how much money you make. And so he says, listen, I'm going to offer you a deal. You don't pay, you just pay interest for the next 5 years, and then at the end, you refinance it. And you go, well, what does that mean? He said, well, listen, your property went from, it doubled in the last 2 years. Now let's say on that same basis, this property, now that you bought for $1.8 million, you can sell it for $3.6 million in another 2 years. All right? And let's say things slow down. Let's say we'll give you 4 years to double to $3.6 million. But by then, you sell it for $3.6 million. They write you a check for $3.6 million. You take it and you pay off this $1.8 million that you owe. And you're ahead another $1.8 million. Wow! And you go, sounds good to me. So you did it in 2006 when you bought it. Well, in 2007, the real estate market started going sideways. In 2008, you couldn't sell that house for what you bought it for. In 2009, that $1.8 million house, people in the neighborhood were selling theirs for $1.2 million. And in 2010, they changed the rules in 2011 that the mortgage, that the FHA, that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac wouldn't buy mortgages for any more than $740,000. And you were trying to sell a house for $1.8 million. All right? And the most you can get for a mortgage against that house by the government guaranteed was $749,000. And that was in 2010. And now in 2011, you hear that they're going to even lower that to around $469 or whatever it is. And the value of your house has now dropped from $1.8 million down to $1.2 million, down to $900,000. And you've got 1 more year to start making payments. You've got 1 more year to start making payments on a balloon mortgage of complete $1.8 million in 2000 and you got a 5-year game, 2011, this year. And you still have that job as a high school teacher, junior high. And this year, you're afraid you're going to get laid off. All right? Your $200,000 is gone. You're facing bankruptcy and you're facing foreclosure. This is the downside of leverage. This happened in the 1920s, mainly with stocks. Everybody borrowed to buy more. They wanted to get in on it because good times don't last forever. The trouble is when you get caught in a speculative frenzy, such as the 1920s, such as the 1990s, and such as the mid-2000s with the real estate bubble, and you get caught, you get a collapse in demand. Why? The money's gone. Not only is the money that you put down gone, you owe far more than you did before you put the money down. This is what happened in the 1930s. In the 1930s when it happened, banks crashed. People couldn't pay what they owed. 25% of America's banks went out of business in the first year. People lost their savings. There was no FDIC. They were gone. All of a sudden, people who had worked hard, put some money away, the bank had closed, they were destitute, and it was over. All right? Now, when this started happening, people started losing jobs, manufacturing started collapsing, and all of a sudden, the United States went, all these foreign companies out there, foreign businesses that manufacture goods cheaper than us, we got to keep them out of here. Because if we don't keep them out of the United States, we're going to lose more jobs here. So they passed in 1930 what is called the Smoot-Hawley Trade Tariff Act. And they put tariffs on all imported goods coming to the United States, 40 to 70%. High tariffs. They didn't want any foreign goods to come to the United States. They did this to protect American jobs. Within 2 years, within a few years, global trade dropped by 50%. I mean, all of a sudden, we exported our depression to other countries. Other countries had been selling goods to the United States. All of a sudden, they couldn't sell the goods to the United States, so they lost their jobs too. So this is what happened. You had a domino effect. Block, 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 block. One thing led to another, one thing led to another. And by 1936, the U.S. stock market was down 90%. You had unemployment lines. You had food lines. Roosevelt was the president. He put in job bills to at least keep people from starving. But he couldn't revive the U.S. economy. It didn't work. Nothing he did worked. They slowed interest rates, they raised interest rates, they made more money available. Nothing the Fed did, nothing the bankers did, nothing the government did during the 1930s revived the U.S. economy. Now, the government did do one thing. The government in 1933 passed the one law to stop another depression from happening again. That law was called glass-steagall. And what it did, it said that banks could no longer bet the savings of Americans. It cut a line. It drew a line in the sand in banking. And on one side you had investment banks, Goldman Sachs, Lehman's, Bear Stearns, all right? The banks that bet and made money by betting. And on the other side you had commercial banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and you had financial institutions like insurance companies that handled money, but were forced to buy only AAA bonds, forced to be very conservative with savers' monies. All right? The bettors were cut away from the rest of the flock because what they had done on the way up in the 1920s, they had bet the savings of Americans and lost at the table of chance, and the whole thing came down, and we went into what is now known as the Great Depression. So in 1933, they passed Glass-Steagall, which disallowed this from ever happening again, that disallowed the Wall Street to bet the savings of Americans. Well, in 1999, Glass-Steagall was repealed. The line in the sand was erased. They allowed, once again, Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, and not only Bear Stearns and Goldman Sachs and all the Wall Street banks to come and bet your savings, they now allowed your insurance companies, Prudential, American Life, AIG, to bet at the same wheel of chance. Now, who are these boys and how do they make money? They make money the same way everyone else makes money in good times. They leverage their bets. They leverage their bets in the same way that a homeowner leverages bet in a growing market. They leverage their bets in the same way that a stockbroker can leverage your buying of stocks in a growing market. Except the investment banks own the markets. The investment banks don't leverage by 10 to 1 or 5 to 1 or 3 to 1. Wall Street banks can leverage 30 to 40 to 1. And that's what they did. When they erased the line between commercial banks and investment banking, they put, once again, the savings of this nation at risk. And they gave it to Wall Street, and Wall Street was making phenomenal amounts of money and taking the cream of the crop off the top. This is what happened in the late 1990s on the run-up in the dot-com boom. And in 1999, when Bill Clinton signed the act that was agreed upon both by Democrats and Republicans, he erased the line that they had put around the savings of Americans, and by 2001, those savings were gone. The banks that bet them could not pay off. Their stocks were dropping like rocks. The stock market was dropping like rocks, And so the Fed knew they had to do something to revive the game. So they slashed their interest rates down to 1%. The money started flowing in the stock market. And that's when you walked in and bought that house for $200,000 in 2002 with 1% credit, with cheap credit, 4%. It was around 8% before. And your house went up to $200,000 in 2 years, 3 years, because all this other money was chasing that same house. Everybody could borrow. I mean, you were a junior high school teacher, and the kid who bought your house for $400,000 in 2005 was the clerk at the Circle K, who was making $11.25 an hour, who got the same loan on his deal that you did when you walked in and you bought the $1 million house right after him, after you bought your house for $400,000. I mean, after all, you were a high school teacher, and you bought a house for $1.8 million. He was a clerk at Circle K. He had just bought your house for $400,000. The system was working. Leverage was going in again. Money was flowing. All right? But what they did was they had broken the bank. The leverage was so enormous, it destroyed the game. It destroyed it in the 1930s, and it destroyed it again in the last few years. What they did, though, they learned some lessons. They learned lessons that if the banks go, everybody's in the dirt. So they had a thing, they had a little scam called the FDIC. And the FDIC guaranteed your bank the losses that you have in the bank against any losses up to $250,000. All right? And now it's even more. And all it is a little label that they put on that bank to make you feel good. Because if you get scared and you pull your money out of the game, their whole game is gone. And they need you to feel confident. They need the chickens on the chicken farm to go around and feel good until it's time for the slaughterhouse. All right? Because if you realize what's happening, you're going to head for the gate. All right? So they put a little label on it. I want to tell you something. There is no fund. The FDIC, oh, it exists. Oh, and they do guarantee your money. But there's no fund. There's no actual fund that the money goes into. They talk about the FDIC fund. There's no such thing. All right? And there hasn't been for years. And the accounting of the FDIC fund that's supposed to guarantee your losses in chance that your bank goes down, they just lost another $19 billion this year. It's already in the red. They owe money. They're not to the good. They owe money. And they're losing more every year. But the United States government says FDIC is going to stand behind it. They keep all the chickens in the chicken yard before they go to the slaughterhouse. I want to tell you something. That chicken yard in which you're walking around plucking up your little bits of grain is going to disappear in the next 2 years. We are in deep, deep trouble. Deep trouble. Bigger trouble than we've ever known before. Because two things have happened. One, what we did do is we decided to keep to make everybody feel safe, and that's what we did with banking. All right, we decided to save the stock market crash, and we created an even bigger crash with the real estate crash. And when real estate goes down, that hangs a noose around people's neck that is far bigger than a real estate. People lose their homes, people are out on the street, and this is what's happening. The biggest difference between now and the 1930s, however, is the money is bad. In the 1930s, money was backed by gold all around the world. In every advanced economy, money was backed by gold. Here we are in 2011. They took the gold away from the money in 1971. They started printing more money than ever in the 1970s. In the 1980s, we switched to a borrowing-based economy. We've been borrowing from the future ever since, and now we've got a paper-based economy on paper money, and what we've got is we've got the 1930s magnified. And I don't know what the leverage is on the disaster. I don't know if it's 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, or 10 to 1. But we've magnified the 1930s. We've leveraged the disaster by an exponential number. And we are about to go off the cliff. Now, in the next program, I'm going to talk about the same thing from a larger perspective and why I've never been more optimistic in my life. And it's not because of making money. It's for a whole different set of reasons. But I've never been more confident. I've never felt better about what is about to happen. And so if you stay for the next program, you're going to find out why I have an optimism in the face of a collapsing economy.